Gorilla Suit Day is an episode of SpongeBob that, while it did include an actual story, fell flat on its face by misunderstanding pacing, comedy, and, most importantly, world building. Let's take a look at Gorilla Suit Day and ask ourselves, why is there a gorilla underwater anyway? Chapter 1. The Story of Gorilla Suit Day. So, to this episode's credit, it does contain an actual story and an interesting premise. The first minute or so of the episode quickly establishes the concept of Gorilla Suit Day, which is a holiday where you dress up as a gorilla. While the opening does convey the information it needs to, I think it is an absolute masterclass in what not to do in terms of pacing. Right out of the gate, we are bombarded with yelling, noises, and things flying around. And sure, the animation is all around creative, but could you slow it down just a little bit? The narrative wants to convey to you how excited SpongeBob and Patrick are about this holiday, but because it overcompensates with all this exaggerated movement, I'm less inclined to believe their excitement. Compare this opening to the opening of Bubble Buddy, as both episodes begin by establishing a funny holiday concept. Bubble Buddy opens with the French narrator saying that
every day is a holiday for SpongeBob, even if he has to make one up.
Which is followed by this.
Hey everybody, it's Leif Erikson Day! Hinga-dinga-durgan.
Bubble Buddy's opening is well-paced, not too in-your-face, and immediately establishes SpongeBob's character. And despite being more mild in its delivery, Bubble Buddy's opening is actually more silly and more absurd than Gorilla Suit Day. This is because the absurdity of the Leif Erikson Day situation is so strong that the writers did not feel the need to overcompensate with a bunch of over-exaggerated visuals. A guy making up a holiday every day to the point where he celebrates whoever the heck Leif Erikson is? The humor is right there. All you have to do is present it, and that's what they did. But there's one major difference between the two openings that is important to acknowledge. Leif Erikson Day is not the premise of Bubble Buddy. It's only a clever way of establishing SpongeBob's outlook on life, which is then immediately challenged when he can't hang out with any of his friends, which leads to the actual premise of the episode, the creation of Bubble Buddy. On the other hand, Gorilla Suit Day, the holiday, is the premise of Gorilla Suit Day, the episode. So it does make sense that the concept of this gorilla-themed holiday would be fleshed out a little more in its opening. So while I wouldn't compare these two episodes in the sense of how much time they spend establishing their respective fictional holidays, I would compare them in how they set up their premise. Bubble Buddy set up its premise by teaching us immediately who the protagonist is and establishing the comedic tone of the show, while Gorilla Suit Day doesn't really tell us much about who SpongeBob and Patrick are as characters other than that they're a little hyperactive. And they established its comedic tone as one that quickly slapsticks around from one thing to another without giving you much time to breathe, which, to be fair, that is the exact comedic tone that they go for now. And I explain all of this for a specific reason, and it's because I think it's really important that I don't just criticize this opening by saying it's too hyperactive or it's too slapstick, and just leave it at that, because those things on their own aren't the problem. The problem is that those things are not used to establish the characters and the story. Their hyperactivity is not earned by the plot, and it distracts from us learning important information about the characters. It's because of these reasons that I see through the ruse of the team behind the show, and how I can know that they only did all this slapstick right off the bat because they are overcompensating for an otherwise weak narrative. So once the premise is set, we get a little montage of what Gorilla Suit Day actually is. And it's basically just SpongeBob going around in a gorilla suit and scaring people. That's it. It's just the townspeople going, gorilla, and running away. So why am I being critical of this? Isn't this exactly what would happen in this situation? Well, sure, but let's consider the fact that this is a cartoon, and there are near limitless possibilities for the kind of bits they could put in this little montage that could sell this episode's story more. Compare the gorilla scaring sequence in this episode to SpongeBob's establishing pranks in Fools in April. In Fools in April, SpongeBob is shown pulling a series of pranks. The purpose of showing these pranks is to establish the kinds of pranks SpongeBob pulls, which are mostly harmless, to contrast with Squidward's more harmful prank that is pulled later in the episode, which teaches the episode's lesson about the difference between funny and unfunny pranks. Now, in a way, Gorilla Suit Day is similar. It shows SpongeBob scaring the townspeople to teach its lesson about not letting pranks go too far. However, even though both episodes succeed from a story perspective, Fools in April absolutely mogs Gorilla Suit Day in terms of making these crucial establishing moments seem memorable. The choices that the writers and animators made with Fools in April's pranks have so much humor and heart to them that it leaves a lasting impression on the audience. SpongeBob making himself like 100 glasses of lemonade for a prank on himself, him drawing a smiley face on his back to mess with a customer, and of course the legendary "What did you put in my drink?" scene. Sponge Truth's jump scare. Hey buddy, do me a favor, how about you don't steal this video this time? So, on the surface, this seems like nothing more than just a way for the show to flex its comedy chops. But these scenes, being as funny and memorable as they are, also serve to make us remember the central core of the episode's lesson, and makes the rest of the narrative far more meaningful. Now, let's compare that to the gorilla montage. What really happens here that's even remotely interesting? I guess the cars get up and walk away like people would. That's kind of a cool animation thing. And then SpongeBob comes out of bananas or whatever, but like it's just not enough. The whole sequence really just boils down to the gorilla suit scares people, with no creative storytelling or animation techniques that make these moments particularly memorable at all. The episode's plot picks up just a little bit when SpongeBob gets stuck inside the gorilla suit and has to go to work at the Krusty Krab where hijinks ensue. It's at this point we start to see a little bit of the lesson this episode was going for, which is that when you pull pranks, it can disrupt your regular life. This then escalates when SpongeBob is mistaken for a real gorilla and taken to a zoo because Patrick claims to be the zookeeper to keep the prank going. With all this, we really do have a pretty decent lesson about the dangers of how a prank can disrupt your own life and how you can lose control of a prank when another person starts to take it too seriously. But this lesson would have been a lot better if it were actually a lesson that kids would remember when they watch this episode. Considering how unmemorable the moments in this episode are and how much this message is muddled by a barrage of hyperactive slapstick moments, I don't foresee most people in this show's target audience actually internalizing this lesson. To compare this again to Fools in April, most young people watching that episode would come away from that viewing experience understanding the importance in exercising caution and responsibility in pulling pranks. Perhaps some of you in my audience were thinking of pulling some kind of prank when you were a kid and thought to yourself, wait, I don't want to be like Squidward. Do you really think there's anyone who had that same experience with Gorilla Suit Day? I highly doubt it. So after SpongeBob is taken to the zoo, a real gorilla takes SpongeBob's place, and yada yada yada, gorilla wreaks havoc, King Kong reference, SpongeBob and the real gorilla switch back, SpongeBob gets a SpongeBob suit to put over his gorilla suit to maintain the status quo, and then it's Kangaroo Day to have another, like, animal joke at the end. Oh yeah, and then they also crowbar in a reference to that gorilla from I Had an Accident. The whole ending sequence has pretty much nothing to do with the lesson of the episode, and SpongeBob does not solve the problem by meaningfully addressing his character flaw. While the joke of SpongeBob just putting on a SpongeBob suit over the gorilla suit is clever, since it doesn't help teach the episode's lesson, it falls flat for me. Chapter 2. Why is there a gorilla underwater? So, while Gorilla Suit Day is a little better than many other modern SpongeBob episodes by simply just having a story and a lesson at all, good job, guys. Bare minimum, you did it. The episode has one more pressing issue that I think is bigger than its story-related flaws. Its world-building flaws. See, I'm no scientist, but I'm pretty sure that gorillas don't live underwater. So these gorillas at the Bikini Bottom Zoo seem a little bit out of place. I mean, I guess they gave them like little fins or whatever to make them sea gorillas, but I'm just not buying what you're selling here. Gorilla Suit Day, I think, embodies a really common complaint amongst some modern SpongeBob critiquers. The show doesn't properly hold true to its underwater theming anymore. But what many of these modern SpongeBob critiquers don't ask, that I would like to ask, is why is SpongeBob underwater in the first place? Why does the underwater setting even matter at all? I'm sure most people, perhaps even people who work on the show, would answer, well, because it's SpongeBob, duh. But I don't think that's really enough. I don't think the decision to set the show around talking fish is an arbitrary one. And if you look at how some of the early episodes used its underwater setting to its advantage, you can see the real reason why SpongeBob is underwater. So first off, it's important to note that SpongeBob was never completely underwater. In fact, even compared to other fictional universes that take place underwater, like Finding Nemo or Shark Tale, SpongeBob is perhaps the least underwatery of them all. I mean, look no further than the show's main setting, the Krusty Krab, and its flagship food item, the Krabby Patty. Sure, the restaurant itself is a bit nautical with its barrel seats and boat doors and galley grub and whatnot, but like a burger place? That's not even remotely fish-like. Fish don't eat beef, they can't operate a grill, they don't exchange currency for food in a restaurant setting. And yet, the setting of the Krusty Krab is not only accepted by the audience, but it's a major contributor to the show standing out as one of the most unique cartoons ever made. What I'm trying to say is that the point of SpongeBob's underwater setting is not the things that define it as an ocean setting, like the fish people, the boat cars, and the jellyfish, but it's a balance between those things and the things that are distinctly not underwater. The Krusty Krab, the mundane city streets of Bikini Bottom, the fact that these fish people use regular old paper dollars. The underwater setting and the elements of the show that subvert it plays into SpongeBob's main message as a show, which is finding magic and joy in the mundane. By making Bikini Bottom look just enough like our own world with just a little bit of ocean wonder, it sells this message. So I think the reason that the gorillas in Gorilla Suit Day bothered me so much is not because it was a land thing in an underwater world, since the show does that all the time, but because there was no broader reason for the gorillas to be there, and their existence disrupted the show's world building rather than enhanced it. Let's compare these underwater gorillas to the example you're probably thinking about right now, the sea bear. The camping episode revolves around Squidward trying to prove to SpongeBob and Patrick that he is a better outdoorsman than them. After a few low-stakes examples of Squidward failing miserably at camping, like him failing to set up his tent, the stakes of the episode are raised when Squidward is warned about the dangerous sea bear, which Squidward does not take seriously, leading to him getting attacked by said sea bear. So how come I take no issue with the existence of the sea bear in the camping episode while I criticize Gorilla Suit Day for having a sea gorilla? Well, it's mostly because of this line right here from the camping episode.
A sea bear? You mean like the ones that don't exist?
This line adds an element of mysticism to the sea bear. It's a thing that the show could have only exist in this episode without any deeper world-building implications. Though, of course, they brought it back in modern seasons, but I digress. The sea bear works with the plot of the episode and works with the show's established world-building, while the gorillas in Gorilla Suit Day actively work against those things. It's like the writers forgot about the show's world building completely, and at some point in the production of the episode, someone was like, hey, aren't we working on like the Under the Sea show? Why are there gorillas? And they were like, screw it, just give the gorillas like little fins or whatever. Them being gorillas doesn't enhance the story. It only distracts from it. Another important episode comparison I need to make is to I Had an Accident. You know, the episode that had that guy in the gorilla suit. Now, when I first saw that there was going to be an episode called Gorilla Suit Day, I immediately thought it was going to be another one of those reference episodes. And if you're a fan of this channel, you know how much I love tearing apart those reference episodes. Which, by the way, you should really subscribe and check them all out. But to this episode's credit, it wasn't a reference episode at all, other than the one moment at the end that had nothing to do with the story. As far as plots go, this episode has nothing to do with I Had an Accident, But in terms of world building, I think there is a worthy comparison to be made. So the plot of I Had an Accident revolves around SpongeBob coping with agoraphobia, which is the fear of going outside, because he hurt himself going sledding. After multiple failed attempts to cure SpongeBob of his fear, Sandy tries to get SpongeBob to face his fears by dressing up Patrick in a gorilla suit that SpongeBob would then save her from. This plan backfires when a real gorilla, played by a live-action man in a gorilla suit, shows up and starts wreaking havoc. The real threat is enough to encourage SpongeBob to step outside, and the conflict is solved when SpongeBob simply points out that gorillas don't belong underwater, which causes, well, this to happen. Now, while this ending is incredibly silly, it does make a poignant point about the nature of agoraphobia, and how sometimes your fears are as non-existent as an underwater gorilla. The team behind the show was so confident in this message that they actually ended the episode by showing a family watching the ending of the episode and getting mad at the show being nonsensical. And I just really need to take a moment to appreciate how much of a baller move it is to end your cartoon episode with this. To be so confident that your absurdist ending of your episode hits hard that you're actually willing to make fun of the uptight audience members who won't get it. By the way, everyone who's ever commented or will comment something like, "It's just a kid's show" on my videos, this is you. You're this guy. Like, can you imagine a modern SpongeBob episode ending like this? Imagine if that was the ending of Gorilla Suit Day. Like, some indignant viewer is like, "Ho ho ho, this episode, am I right?" It would just be so unearned. The Gorilla Zebra Sunset ending only could have worked in the earlier seasons because the show was still dedicated to being underwater, and only subverted being underwater when it worked with the story. If Gorilla Suit Day was in the same season as I Had an Accident, then they never would have been able to get away with the ending in the way that they did, because their world building would have been wildly inconsistent. I think the most important takeaway from this episode is that things that seem like arbitrary decisions really do matter in storytelling. It matters if your characters are too hyperactive. It matters if your jokes are unmemorable. It matters if you break established world building. These things don't matter only because they make the show less funny or less entertaining or give it worse vibes or whatever. It matters because all of these things, if not properly respected, get in the way of creating a proper story. And that is why Gorilla Suit Day is a mess of a SpongeBob episode. You guys remember a little while back when Wendy's was like, "Come get a Krabby Patty," and it was just like a regular burger? That made me so angry. I think the reason the Wendy's Krabby Patty bothered me so much is that it flies in the face of the mythological status of this burger. That really got me thinking about how much the concept of the secret formula makes SpongeBob such a special show. While it might not be so obvious on the surface, the existence of the secret formula contributes to important story elements present throughout the show. In a way, it's almost the secret formula of SpongeBob's writing. The main thing the formula does is set the main stakes of the show. Like, SpongeBob cannot, under any circumstances, let anything happen to this thing. The show does a great job of letting you know that if Plankton snatches the formula, the universe of SpongeBob as we know it ends. There are lots of other universe-ending scenarios in other shows as well. For example, if Tom catches Jerry, the show ends. If anyone finds out about Timmy Turner's fairies, the show ends. If Brian takes over the world, the show... Okay, it looked like Brian on the teleprompter, but it's Brain. I was talking about Pinky and the Brain, you know, like, "I know what we're going to do tonight, Pinky. Try to take over the world." It's that. Brain. If Brain takes over the world in Pinky and the Brain, the show ends. Obviously, all these show-ending scenarios would never happen, but the possibility that it could add stakes to the story, and since it's a recurring conflict, the audience already knows what's going on, and the stakes don't have to be re-established each episode. The secret formula is seen the most in Plankton-focused episodes. Some of these Plankton episodes have a reputation of being repetitive, or formulaic, if you will. There are a lot of episodes that are just Plankton pretends to be X thing in order to try and get the formula. The first time this Plankton cosplay plot was used was in Imitation Crabs, where Plankton created a Mr. Krabs robot and said,
"Ravioli, ravioli, give me the formuoli."
While this episode is an absolute classic, some of its successors seem to just kind of repeat that plot. Plankton pretends to be a genie. Plankton pretends to be SpongeBob's brother without a disguise, even though SpongeBob knows who he is. There was even an episode where Plankton pretends to be Sandy by using her fur as a disguise. It's grotesque. I hate that episode. The best episodes where Plankton wants the formula are episodes where his desire for the formula reveals something about his character. You've got episodes like Fun, where it seems almost like Plankton might redeem himself and truly become friends with SpongeBob, only for him to ruin it by running off with a Krabby Patty. Not only does this contribute to the episode's lesson, which is that you can't trust everybody, but it also tells us that the formula is such a corrupting force on Plankton that he would gladly choose it over real friendship. Then you've got The Algae is Always Greener, which has an opposite conclusion to Fun. In the episode, Plankton has his chance to take the formula and the Krusty Krab and seemingly everything he's ever wanted, because he built a Switch Lives machine which allows him to basically become Mr. Krabs. However, the responsibilities of being Mr. Krabs proves to be far too much for Plankton, and he sees it as not worth dealing with.
Goodbye, everyone. I'll remember you all in therapy.
So in looking at these two episodes together, we can take an interesting look into Plankton's priorities. The Fun episode shows us something that he values less than the formula, which is friendship. Whereas The Algae is Always Greener shows us something he values more than the formula, his freedom. My personal favorite Plankton episode is Plankton's Army. In the episode, Plankton recruits his family to steal the formula. Now, I love it when TV shows introduce family members that haven't been seen before, because it gives us a chance to learn more about that character's upbringing. In this episode's case, we learn that Plankton grew up as a hillbilly. I love this because it shows us that Plankton became an evil genius to overcompensate for his more yeehaw upbringing. Now I get why he likes to brag and say,
I went to college!
He's the first Plankton to even go to college. No wonder he's so proud of it. This episode also reveals Plankton's first name, Sheldon. Karen and the family members relentlessly mock Plankton for his first name, which, did anyone else feel bad for anyone named Sheldon when we watched this episode? Like, I don't know, I just can't imagine being named Sheldon and watching this episode where there's like a whole scene where they're making fun of your name. Well, my name's not Sheldon, I guess. So I think revealing Plankton's first name in this episode is another way of using this episode's plot to teach us about the character. Not only do we now know about Plankton's familial ties, but we even know his first name, when before he had only been referred to as Plankton. It's just another way to make us feel like we know him more. Not sure if that was intentional on the writer's part, or if they just really wanted to make fun of people named Sheldon. While Plankton struggles to work with his hillbilly kin at first, he is eventually able to lead them into an all-out onslaught of the Krusty Krab. The animators really made use of the small size of the Planktons to make this feel almost like some kind of castle siege. And while this is just an ordinary burger restaurant, because the show does such a good job at making you aware of how important the secret formula is, you feel as much adrenaline watching the Planktons break into the Krusty Krab as you would watching someone try to rob a bank. This was also, at the time, the closest Plankton ever got to stealing the formula, even going so far as to open the bottle. I was on the edge of my seat as a kid, thinking that it was truly over. Plankton won. The Krusty Krab is finished! Of course, Krabs was one step ahead of him, switching it out with a fake formula that says Krabby Patties are made with ground plankton, sending Sheldon and his family members running away and preserving the status quo. As a kid, when Plankton was reading the formula, I actually thought that we were going to finally learn what the secret formula was. Of course, I was just being naive. The formula can never be revealed. It's one of those TV and movie tropes of thing that is really important, but we never find out what it is. It's like the briefcase in Pulp Fiction, or what state does The Simpsons take place in? The discussion of what it could be overshadows what it actually is. The point of the secret formula is that it creates this extremely delicious burger, so if it ever were revealed, it would have to be revealed as something that would live up to that expectation. If it was just Oh yeah, put some garlic, a pinch of pepper, and your left pinky toenail. A lot of people would actually try it and be like, well, that's it? That's not that good. Some people out there think that they could reveal the formula if they made it with some kind of magical ingredient. That way, someone in the real world could never try it, and the in-universe hype for the Krabby Patty would still make sense. I've seen it thrown around that the secret formula is actually Neptune's magic spice, and I don't really vibe with that explanation. First off, Neptune is horrible at making burgers, so I don't think he'd be able to develop such a spice. And secondly, having the Krabby Patty be created by magic would rob the Krusty Krab of its regularness. The charm of the Krusty Krab is that it's this dingy little place that just happens to serve the best burgers in town. And we've all been to that place, right? I mean, we've never been to the literal Krusty Krab, but we've all been to a place like the Krusty Krab. You know the place, whether it's a restaurant from your childhood or a place you went on a vacation or a Guy Fieri themed burger shop in an airport that has just the greatest darn chicken tenders on the planet. We've all sat down at that restaurant that just inexplicably has the tastiest food ever. That's the secret formula. And SpongeBob's secret formula is relatable to us because it captures that feeling. You know what doesn't capture that feeling? Dave's single from Wendy's wrapped up in a SpongeBob themed lie. Sorry, Dave. I don't hate your food, but you're no Krabby Patty. And you're certainly not Guy Fieri's special airport fried chicken. Seriously, the place is only at this one airport. Like, you have to buy a ticket and go through TSA and everything to get it. It's not fair. Guy, please. I'm begging you, please open another one. Or just send me the secret formula. I'll take good care of it. So while we never have learned and never will learn what the secret formula is, we do have an idea of how it was created. There are some contradicting pieces of lore regarding the origin of the formula. I'm pretty sure the first explanation for the formula's existence is seen in the episode Enemy-in-Law, which is the episode where Plankton dates Mr. Krabs' mom, don't ask, and finds out that if she marries his mom, he will get access to the secret formula because it's an old Krabs family recipe. Later on, we get a different backstory in the episode Friend or Foe, which is an episode that shows us the childhood of Mr. Krabs and Plankton, where it's revealed they were once friends. In the episode, it's shown that the formula was made accidentally, when a bunch of random ingredients fell into this vat. Then, after that, the Plankton movie retcons the Friend or Foe origin by showing Plankton first discovering the formula as an adult as he just stumbles into the Krusty Krab one day and is like, "Yum, this burger's really great. Maybe I can use it to take over the world." I really don't care for the Plankton movie formula retcon. It doesn't ruin the movie. I did enjoy the film a lot, as you can see in my video on the subject, but I just don't get why it had to remove Plankton's personal connection to the formula's creation. There's also some Camp Coral nonsense that says that SpongeBob created the secret formula at like Camp Coral or something. I don't know. I just read it on a wiki. I really don't care. It's not that one. That's not the origin. I choose to ignore it. I choose to ignore it. This is why I choose to acknowledge the Friend or Foe version of the formula's creation. The fact that it was literally Plankton slamming the door as he walked out of his friendship with Krabs that triggered the creation of the Krabby Patty, and for it to then go on to be the centerpiece of their lifelong feud feels poetic. You can make a perfect burger, but you can never make a perfect friendship. I also love the story of the accidental creation of the formula because it gives it a much more mythological background, like it was bestowed on Mr. Krabs by the universe itself. It being just an old family recipe, while not a bad origin, it lacks the magic that I think the secret formula should represent. And when I say magic, I mean metaphorical magic, not literal Neptune spice magic. One flaw I could see in the formula being created accidentally is that it makes it so Mr. Krabs didn't really earn it. He was just in the right place at the right time. However, while this could be seen as a writing flaw, I see it as an improvement. It makes it kind of ambiguous as to if Krabs really deserves the formula. After all, Krabs isn't really this righteous character. If you think about it, both Krabs and Plankton set up the original restaurant where the formula was created. Should Plankton not be entitled to it as well just because he left the room when the ingredients spilled? This gives a lot more nuance to Plankton formula stealing episodes. Maybe Plankton deserves the formula. All in all, the secret formula is important to SpongeBob because it sets the stakes of the show, it provides mystery and discussion, it makes one of the main settings stand out, and is a major centerpiece of the show's lore and overall world building. While plenty of shows achieve all of these things, the fact that the formula as a concept achieves all of that is something that is truly special. Saying that Band Geeks is a good SpongeBob episode is like saying that the Mona Lisa is a good painting. Yeah, we know. However, when something reaches such a legendary status, we sometimes, in our admiration of that work, forget to examine the aspects of its creation that made it reach that prestige in the first place. What choices did Da Vinci make as an artist regarding the shape of her mouth, the expression on her eyes, her body language, her framing within the shot, the colors used in the background? These choices are ones that any artist would have to make when creating a painting similar to this one. Yet Da Vinci made these choices in such a way that this painting is referred to as one of, if not the most, iconic paintings of all time. The SpongeBob Band Geeks episode of paintings, if you will. Chapter 1. The Setup. Band Geeks is a story that revolves around Squidward forming a band with the Bikini Bottomites and struggling to get them to create a presentable marching band performance. The opening few minutes of this episode do an excellent job setting up the major players in this story, communicating the stakes and establishing comedic tone. The very first line of the episode is a joke at the expense of Squidward's lack of musical talent. While playing clarinet, Squidward is interrupted by a knock at the door where a doctor explains that they assume that there is a dying animal in the house, to which Squidward slams the door in his face. This joke accomplishes a lot of things beyond making us laugh. The fact that they chose a doctor mistaking Squidward's playing for a dying animal communicates to us that not only is Squidward considered bad in universe, but he's objectively bad. The slamming of the door also tells us something about Squidward's sense of self and his own talent. In slamming the door so nonchalantly, it tells us that this news, while it annoys him, is not surprising. It's not some big revelation to him that people think he sucks. With this opening joke immediately establishing Squidward as an underdog, he receives a phone call from Squilliam, who somehow magically knows about the doctor visiting him. I think it's important to point out that this is Squilliam Fancy Son's first appearance in the series, because that means that the writers specifically decided for Squilliam to look exactly like Squidward plus a unibrow to tell this story specifically. It hammers home the frustration of the scene. Here's someone who is, for all intents and purposes, exactly like you, but they're just doing better. This, combined with the previous door slamming scene, puts Squidward in quite a low position. A great place to start for a protagonist of a narrative. In this scene, Squidward is presented an opportunity to play in the Bubble Bowl with his band. Now, since the Bubble Bowl is something that only exists within this universe, the weight of what the Bubble Bowl is relies on how the characters react to it. But considering Squidward responds by going, we can assume that this Bubble Bowl is a pretty big deal, even if we aren't 100% sure what it actually is. It's also heavily implied in the scene that Squilliam only called to put Squidward down and didn't expect him to actually even say yes to the request. But to his and possibly the audience's surprise, Squidward claims to have a band and accepts the challenge. So with all the moments in this first scene that put down Squidward in mind, it endears us as the audience to him that he, in spite of all that, pushes through and accepts the job. Usually, Squidward is supposed to be an unlikable character, the guy who we shouldn't act like, in contrast to SpongeBob, who usually is the kind of person we should be. Band Geeks subverts that usual formula and portrays Squidward as someone to admire, and these early scenes make that clear to viewers. We are then introduced to the other major entity of the story, the people of Bikini Bottom, who after reading Squidward's little flyer, show up to become the titular Band Geeks. The way that the band members are portrayed isn't so much that they are incompetent, but more so that they aren't good at following instructions and let personal grievances get in the way of preparing the performance. These are the most pressing roadblocks to any group of people being able to achieve a common goal. And the reason that the jokes in these scenes are funny are because they resonate with that relatable human experience. There are two jokes in the first rehearsal night that establish the band members as character flaw. There's the drum section playing their drumsticks like a trumpet and spitting them at Squidward, establishing them being bad at following directions, and Patrick kicking Sandy, causing a fight between them that ends in this. establishing their tendency for infighting. So in just a few short minutes, the episode sets up the conflict between Squidward and his band geeks, communicates how important Squidward's success is to him, and convinces the audience to root for him as an underdog, and establishes that these story elements will be the root of the episode's humor. Chapter 2. The humor. SpongeBob is most famous for its comedy, and Band Geeks is packed with funny moment after funny moment. What makes an episode of SpongeBob, or any high-quality comedy show, funny is how their joke and laugh lines exist within the context of their story. In order to tell a good joke, you have to craft a world, characters, and a story that you care about and then apply proper joke structure over it. Take, for example, this joke.
Is mayonnaise an instrument?
On its own, asking if mayonnaise is an instrument isn't really that funny. It's just a guy confusing one random thing with another. The reason the joke is funny is because we already have the context of why Squidward wants to form a band, and the joke lands because it further communicates how difficult that is going to be to do with this group of people, since one of them is so dumb he has to ask such a question. The joke then doubles down with,
Horseradish is not an instrument either.
but instead of Patrick asking the question, he just puts his hand up, to which Squidward guesses that this one other kind of obscure condiment was the next thing Patrick thought was an instrument, and since Patrick puts his hand down, it is communicated that that was exactly his question. The reason the second line resonates with us is that it communicates a sense of familiarity that Squidward and Patrick have with one another that would only really be the case in a little community group like this one. It reestablishes not only that this is going to be a difficult effort, but that Squidward is not someone with the resources of someone like Squilliam, and that these people, despite their flaws, are really all he's got. So you might be turning your nose up right now and shaking your head, baffled that I just went on for about 45 seconds explaining the nuances of the "is mayonnaise an instrument" joke from SpongeBob. You might be asking, doesn't explaining the joke ruin the joke? And first off, that saying doesn't actually apply to critical analysis. Saying explaining the joke ruins the joke applies to the joke teller, not the joke critic. However, I do think it is important that we, as consumers, and especially if we want to be writers, examine what makes jokes, well, jokes. And I think that there is one component of humor that is its most important ingredient: truth. What makes a joke funny is that it is an exaggerated representation of something real. Take, for example, the joke where Plankton works on his harmonica solo, and he runs between all the different spots in the harmonica until he runs out of breath and passes out. We all get the premise. Plankton is tiny, so he can't play the normal size instruments. If you asked 1,000 people why the joke was funny, 999 of them would just say that. And that's okay that most people think that that is what makes the joke funny. But that's not all there is to this joke. This moment represents the difficulty of an amateur attempting an instrument that they weren't suited for. And another reason we find the joke funny is because we relate to that, as we've all had situations where we felt like Plankton in this moment. Makes us feel heard, makes us feel like we're not alone, and we mostly feel that unconsciously. The moment being so cartoonishly impossibly absurd makes it so no one watching would have ever been in this exact situation, which gives it the perfect balance of the joke itself simultaneously making fun of no one, yet being relatable to everyone. The joke even succeeds at not being mean-spirited, because at the end of the episode, they do get Plankton a tiny piano, showing that he, and anyone else who had a similar experience, just needed an accommodating instrument. Most of the jokes in the middle section of Band Geeks, you know, the part where it says stuff like "day 4" with all the time cards and all that stuff, all of the jokes boil down simply to, these are amateurs who are struggling. This is a common comedy technique called a joke montage, where after a situation is set up, the narrative will cut to a series of bits that deliver slightly different punchlines, all within the same sort of message. Is mayonnaise an instrument? The drumstick spitting, Patrick kicking Sandy, the flag twirler explosion, Plankton's harmonica, and even this moment all communicate the exact same thing multiple times over the course of a few minutes. So you might be asking, if all these jokes mean the same thing, why have them all coexist in the same episode? And there are a few reasons for that. First off, this particular joke montage indicates a passage of time. Squidward's conflict in the episode is set to a specific timetable of a little less than a week. So by having each bit be preceded by a time card indicating the passage of time, while the band themselves show no sign of improvement, we as the audience start to feel more nervous about Squidward's chances of succeeding. Also, by repeating the same message but with different jokes, the narrative makes its main theme quite clear. There's nothing wrong writing-wise, with repeating the same message, as long as you repeat that message using different methods, like in this case, different jokes with different characters. In fact, most stories actually only have a handful of messages in them at all, and a large majority of the runtime is just different ways of repeating that same message. The reason this is necessary is because the repetition of the same message makes it more likely that the actual message will stay in someone's mind. And lastly, it's just more entertaining to have more jokes in your episode. I know I talk a lot about deep messages of stories, and those things are always important, but entertainment is just as important as well. If your narrative isn't entertaining, no one is going to stay for the deep messages. Both are required for any story to succeed. Chapter 3: Sweet Victory. On the final day of rehearsals, the band geeks all break out into a big fight where they attack one another with their instruments. Once the clock strikes, they immediately stop, and one of them says this:
"Hey, class is over."
Okay, see you tomorrow.
If you think about what I said earlier about truth in joke telling, this moment hits a lot harder. This line, I think, so perfectly communicates one of the most frustrated human attitudes around: apathy. For someone to make a commitment, not care about it, and then just be glad to go home once it's over is a disgustingly common human action. And the narrative did a great job of criticizing that action through this one humorous moment. It was a stroke of writing brilliance that this joke immediately precedes the tone shift. For us as the audience to be now so against the band geeks for their absolute apathy towards the project makes Squidward's dramatic speech resonate so much more with the audience. And for the speech to end with,
I'll just tell them you all died in a marching accident.
like, you guys are so worthless, you might as well be dead. The story made you feel that way about this group in like 7 minutes of screen time. It's a real big accomplishment. And they achieved that because of all the meticulous choices I talked about earlier. It is at this point that SpongeBob makes a big speech. SpongeBob didn't have a whole lot of presence in the episode up until this point, though he was earlier trying to stop the fight before it started. SpongeBob is usually the moral center of the show, and often represents how we, as the audience, should act in our own lives. So with that in mind, I think it's appropriate that he gives the big turnaround speech. Now, if this were any other show, a speech like this would probably amount to something like, "We need to be better, guys, cause that's what's right," or whatever, and that probably would have resonated just fine. But SpongeBob is a show that does a really good job of communicating a really deep message without really shoving it in your face. Not to say shoving messages in your face is always a bad thing, but SpongeBob just doesn't roll like that. I think this is why so many commenters on my videos will act like SpongeBob isn't supposed to have deep lessons. And like, it does, guys. SpongeBob always, at least in the early seasons, had a deep lesson in every single one of its episodes. They just are really good at communicating that message subtly, and you are willingly ignoring it to fit your own shallow worldview. In SpongeBob's speech, he doesn't really speak highly of Squidward at all. The nicest thing he says about him is,
Squidward's always been there for us when it was convenient for him.
and then he goes on talking about how a firefighter and a paramedic save people's lives, and then just asks everyone to pretend that Squidward is a firefighter or some guy in an ambulance. Now again, at surface level, it's funny because SpongeBob is talking about people who are not Squidward and are way better people than Squidward in a speech that's supposed to be standing up for him. But what makes this moment really resonate is the very idea that we should treat people this way, that we should treat our friends like they're a fireman or some guy in an ambulance unconditionally, and to use Squidward, who is usually pretty jerky in most episodes, including this one, as the person that we should treat with this kind of respect only makes this moment hit so well. And this all leads into Sweet Victory, the final ending song that ties the entire narrative together. The reason that Sweet Victory works so well as a finale to this episode is because this episode did such a good job at communicating how very flawed and human, yes, I know they're fish, but you know what I mean, the characters were. It shows that if you set aside your self-doubts, learn some discipline and pay attention, ignore personal grievances, and put your trust and love in your fellow man unconditionally, you can create something beautiful. And you might be thinking, oh, that's what Sweet Victory means? And even if you are just putting the actual subtext of this scene into words for the first time here, in a way, you always knew that this is why Band Geeks resonated with you so much, because the narrative makes you feel that way without having to listen to my nerdy video essays. I'm glad you do though, thanks for watching this far, I appreciate it. Anyway, one last thing about the Sweet Victory finale that ties it all together is the Bubble Bowl twist. It turns out that the Bubble Bowl was actually a literal bubble within a human football field. This not only is a subversion of the expectation of the whole marching band thing and helps transition transition us into the classic rock finale, but it also gives us a much more personal connection to the song. They're performing for people, for our world, giving the message directly to us. So because of all of these elements, the setup, the humor, the deep themes, the final song, that makes Fangeeks one of the greatest stories ever told. And that might sound a little silly, right? I mean, one of the greatest stories ever told is an 11-minute SpongeBob episode, for crying out loud. But to that I say, why does it sound silly? Why do we have this sort of bias? Chapter 4: The Super Bowl Snub. In 2019, it was expected for a little while that the Super Bowl of that year was going to include Sweet Victory in the halftime show, as a tribute to the recently passed Stephen Hillenburg. What then happened was this.
A true musical genius who needs no introduction.
And then it went into the quote-unquote real halftime show. And yeah, I know it was 7 years ago, but I wasn't a YouTuber then, so I'm talking about it now. There's so much wrong with this. First off, Sweet Victory, at least the cut of the song that appeared in Fangeeks, is like a minute long. It obviously didn't need to be the entire halftime show, but this was just none of it. It's almost like how it's more disrespectful to give a waiter a 5-cent tip than to not tip them at all. I also take issue with the fact that it just straight up didn't understand the episode at all. Like, the whole point of Sweet Victory is that it was everyone coming together and taking the performance seriously. SpongeBob did not do this little dance when they were already on stage. He put on his eager face before the show started, backstage. During the song, he locked in. But I think what is most telling about the Sweet Victory Super Bowl snub is not so much that it happened at all, but how it reflects on the perception of a show like SpongeBob, and how misunderstood it is as something culturally impactful. Let's be honest about the real reason that they didn't have a celebrity sing Sweet Victory.
Money!
These performances cost a lot to produce. Every 10 seconds of performance probably costs more money than the Chum Bucket makes in 10 years.
Hey, I resent that.
They just thought it wasn't worth their time. And while I hope that they were wrong, I hope that, in truth, this was the result of a bunch of out-of-touch execs thinking a kids show wasn't going to get as many eyes as their main headliner, it might be, unfortunately, true. The arts, in general, are not taken as seriously as they ought to be. Culturally, the arts are seen as expendable, rote entertainment, that they exist insofar as to waste the time that we don't spend working. But this is not what the arts are at all. The arts serve a social function, to broaden perspectives, to teach lessons, to encourage critical thinking. If not for the arts, so many morals and perspectives that you or I hold never would have even crossed our minds. Yet for some reason, we as a culture don't appreciate these things. To understand why we don't is a conversation for a future video. But the truth is that for a vast majority, the arts are seen as nothing more than a way to kill time with absolutely no acknowledgement of their real social function. Some certain kinds of artistic works transcend this preconceived notion and are just about universally taken seriously. Things like the works of Shakespeare, biblical texts, classic authors like Dickens and such, prestigious Hollywood movies, and now even some of the highest quality television shows like Breaking Bad are all treated with a sense of reverence. But why is it that we acknowledge something like the works of Shakespeare with this pompous high regard, and yet stick up our nose at an episode of SpongeBob, when if you really break down both things, they accomplish the exact same thing, communicating a message through a story, and they both do it about as good as any writer ever could accomplish. The only difference between the two, really, is that it's a lot harder to understand Shakespeare, and SpongeBob can be understood by someone of any age or educational attainment. But that doesn't inherently make one better or more worthy of being taken seriously by the other. It's only a fallacious bias on our part. I would like to point out that in 2024, they did play Sweet Victory at the Super Bowl. It wasn't in the halftime show, it was like, I think, before it or something. But this does show that some executive somewhere saw it to be financially beneficial to animate the song and add some fun little SpongeBob effects to these football players. I gotta say, I thought it was nice. Made me smile, and it's an indication that SpongeBob is culturally taken seriously enough for this. This is all to say that even though SpongeBob is considered one of the most prolific cartoons of all time, it's still an uphill battle to argue how seriously it actually should be taken. Like I said earlier, Fangeeks resonates with us as the audience whether or not we understand all of this collegiate level writing theory I talked about in this video. You don't have to watch a video essay to understand that it's a story about a bunch of underdogs coming together and achieving sweet victory. But The real reason that I do make these videos is that I think that understanding is oftentimes ignored. If we, culturally, had a better attitude towards the arts, we'd get positive outcomes like higher quality movies, funding for local high school and community theater, and, of course, the full performance of Sweet Victory at the Super Bowl halftime show. But why I argue for such things is not just because I want some better entertainment, though that would be nice, but because I believe in the broader social function of the arts, which is its capability to encourage a more thoughtful and empathetic population. The message of Band Geeks that resonates with me the most is the concept of flawed individuals coming together despite their differences to make something beautiful for the sake of their fellow man. In a way, it reflects my own hope in humanity, that we are capable of coming together and making something beautiful. And I think if you all just pretend that I'm a fireman or some guy in an ambulance, we can truly achieve sweet victory. Dying for Pie is one of the most character-dense, story-driven, and, most importantly, hilarious 11 minutes of television ever put to screen. How could the SpongeBob writers craft such a brilliantly executed story? If that question interests you, make sure to keep watching as we break down how to write an episode like Dying for Pie. So, Dying for Pie, like all great stories, takes a character on a journey where they have their flaws challenged and their perspectives changed. The protagonist of this episode is Squidward, and the opening of the episode makes one thing very clear. He finds this little yellow guy insufferable. What's his name again? SpongeBob. Right, yes, SpongeBob. The SpongeBob-Squidward dynamic is something regular viewers of the show are quite familiar with. They are characters who are completely opposite in terms of their attitudes towards life, with SpongeBob being overly positive and Squidward being overly negative. Squidward has 3 interactions with SpongeBob in less than the first minute of the episode that re-establish this dynamic. The episode opens on Squidward playing piano, only to find SpongeBob ruining his playing with a Krusty Krab dinging bell, showing that Squidward finds SpongeBob so annoying, it haunts his dreams. Then we see Squidward walking in, the shot speaks for itself, and then SpongeBob enthusiastically greets Squidward, to which Squidward doesn't respond. So with these simple moments, we are introduced to the SpongeBob-Squidward relationship, and we are shown that Squidward's main want is to have as little interaction with this yellow cube as possible. These moments also establish Squidward's character flaw. He's too cynical, but the very beginning of the episode with Squidward's piano playing dream does give one extra layer to Squidward's character, his artistic side, which does show that somewhere inside Squidward there is a desire for something greater and that he isn't some unfeeling grouch. And all of this is established without a single word from Squidward himself. All it takes is a couple simple little interactions and the foundation is set for a great story. Then comes the first moment where Squidward's character flaw is challenged, when Mr. Krabs tells Squidward to participate in an employee brotherhood day. Squidward at first tries to refuse, stating, "I won't act brotherly towards that guy." I love the little moment it shows with SpongeBob after Squidward says this. Something about SpongeBob's behavior in this episode is that, while it's silly, it's not too silly and over the top. The SpongeBob moments in this episode do just enough to make us understand why Squidward finds him annoying, but don't do too much for us as the audience to find him annoying, which allows us to want to see Squidward come around and be his friend. In later seasons, when SpongeBob annoys even the audience, it makes us not root for that positive outcome. This more subtle SpongeBob behavior is best illustrated by SpongeBob's gift to Squidward, the sweater made of eyelashes. While the choice of SpongeBob giving Squidward an itchy sweater that says "I heart you" might seem like a simple one, it's actually a carefully crafted writing decision that accomplishes making the audience understand both that Squidward finds the gift annoying and still makes us like SpongeBob for making it, which is not an easy line to toe, by the way. The way they accomplish this is by having the sweater be made of eyelashes. The fact that it is made of eyelashes does make us understand Squidward's annoyance because that would undoubtedly be an itchy sweater, but also because SpongeBob is missing his own eyelashes when he says it's made of eyelashes, it shows us that SpongeBob actually used his own eyelashes to make the sweater. This is a common cartoon strategy where a character does a thing that is literally impossible, like in this case making a sweater out of their own eyelashes, to show the audience just how dedicated they are to that task, and how much they went through to complete it. After Squidward rejects the sweater, SpongeBob makes another sweater out of his tears. It shows us that SpongeBob is so sad about the rejection of the sweater that he literally breaks the laws of physics. At this point, Squidward must figure out a gift for SpongeBob, where he encounters some pirates hauling pies, to which Squidward asks if they are homemade, and the pirates respond,
"They were made in a factory. A bomb factory. They're bombs."
With this line, this simple simple story about a guy being annoyed with his coworker has just introduced life and death stakes. After the greedy pirate captain lies about it being a bomb to make a few bucks, Squidward brings the pie to Krabs, thinking the whole charade over. An explosion happens, because of course it does, and when Squidward and Krabs return to the Krusty Krab, SpongeBob licks his fingers, which leads them to believe that SpongeBob ate the bomb. Krabs then establishes a timetable of SpongeBob's impending doom, setting the time of detonation at sunset, leading Squidward to make the choice to spend SpongeBob's last day on Earth spending time with him and doing anything he wants in what is a surprisingly heartfelt scene. Like, I know this episode is known for being one of the funniest in the series, but Squidward really sells the emotional stakes of what's going on here.
There's gonna be love!
Props to Roger Bumpus's voice acting. So what's being set up here is a plot that we see a lot in the SpongeBob series. Squidward has to spend time with SpongeBob for X reason. It's a way of teaming the two up, even though Squidward hates the little guy. Episodes like Pizza Delivery, Jellyfishing, and Club SpongeBob all force Squidward to be around our favorite fry cook for an extended period of time. However, even though these other episodes are great, Dying for Pie is different for one main reason: choice. In Pizza Delivery, Squidward has to spend time with SpongeBob because it's a part of his job. In Jellyfishing, he's injured and can't get away. In Club SpongeBob, he's stranded in the kelp forest. But Dying for Pie puts Squidward in a situation where he chooses to walk up to SpongeBob and say, "Hey, let's hang out." And he does it for a pretty good reason, literally believing that it's SpongeBob's last day on Earth and he knows this would make him happy. This is sometimes the beauty of characters in TV shows. We can see them put into these situations and actually see how they would react to something so serious. It makes you think, what would you do if you were in this situation, as absurd as it may be? Then comes the list of things SpongeBob wants to do with Squidward, which is a classic cartoon montage of escalating jokes and moments all framed within completing SpongeBob's list. While to the casual viewer, this seems like nothing more than a series of bits all loosely strung together, if you more deeply examine the moments the writers chose to include and the order in which they included them, you can get an idea of the emotional and comedic journey that the viewer is taking. The first thing on SpongeBob's list is to introduce Squidward to everyone in town. This is another cartoonish exaggeration similar to the eyelash sweater. Obviously, it's impossible to introduce someone to everyone in a town in a single afternoon, but by the episode choosing to make this impossibly long task the first thing that Squidward has to do, and communicating that task with a mini montage of Squidward having to interact with various background fish, in less than 20 seconds it sells that Squidward had to go through quite a lot on only task number 1. And then, the second thing on the list, do the exact same thing again, wearing a salmon suit. Then the third thing on the list is a much smaller task than the first two. Squidward has to listen to an unfunny knock-knock joke, which is funny to the audience because it's unfunny to Squidward. It's a good contrast to have the third thing on the list be much shorter, since the first two things were long tasks, as it makes the actual time it would take to get through the list more ambiguous. Next up is Friends in Reverse, just a silly little thing to do. Again, another seemingly small one. Then they make this noise, which apparently if you look closely at the list, it says it's act like an ape. Huh, never knew that until I more closely examined the episode. Then SpongeBob ties himself to Squidward's face and gives him directions. Then after that, the writers really ramp up the absurdity by having SpongeBob perform open heart surgery, which is funny because that's not exactly a thing that you think that SpongeBob would have on his list. The open heart surgery is the last thing on the list that we see, with SpongeBob checking off a few more things to show they're coming up on the end of the list. There's a moment where for some reason SpongeBob checks off in his salmon suit again. Not sure why that is. The animators must have been strapped for time, so they just reused the shot. Literally unwatchable. So after the list montage, we get the last thing on the list.
Watch the sunset with Squidward.
And this moment right here is the whole reason the writers took us on this little joke montage in the first place. See, in the wackiness of SpongeBob's list, we and Squidward forgot why this was happening. But as soon as the word sunset is uttered, the tone completely shifts. We remember the bomb. Then we get to the sunset scene, which starts off with a really strong joke.
Just the three of us. You, me, and this brick wall you built between us.
But the most impactful line of this scene, I think, is probably this one.
If I were to die right now in some sort of fiery explosion due to the carelessness of a friend, that'd just be okay.
While SpongeBob says this without knowing what Squidward knows, it does show that, at the very least, Squidward succeeded in what he set out to do. He truly did give SpongeBob the exact last day on Earth he would have wanted, and there's something beautiful about that. I also just love the matter-of-fact statement of,
due to the carelessness of a friend.
while I'm sure no one anyone watching this has ever been in an exact situation where they let someone eat a pie that was actually a bomb, we've all been in situations where we've hurt someone, and we would do anything to make it right. And at its core, that's what this story is really about. It's about someone who did something wrong and went through their own personal hell in order to try and make the situation as right as he possibly could. That's what makes SpongeBob one of the greatest cartoons of all time. Take away the nautical nonsense and the Krusty Krab and the slapstick humor and the absurdity of a pie being a bomb and all these crazy faces that would later become memes, you've got a simple story about a guy who screwed up and somewhat redeemed himself. And if you ever want to write a cartoon episode as good as this one, you need a strong foundation like that. Then we get to the explosion. I mean, we all know it's coming, right? Can't introduce a bomb in the first act if it doesn't go off in the third, Chekhov's gun and all that, or in this case, Chekhov's pie. And then of course, SpongeBob does end up being alive, but for a few seconds after the explosion happens, Squidward, while truly believing SpongeBob to be gone, has this to say.
At least I was able to make his last few hours meaningful.
And then he says,
I am such a good person.
like, dude just thinks he killed his friend and coworker and he's complimenting himself, but at the same time, I can't even dislike him for it. One, because the comedic timing is so good, and two, because he really does show genuine remorse here. And we've seen how much he's changed over the course of this episode. Then another explosion happens, which reveals SpongeBob blowing bomb bubbles, which is such a perfect SpongeBob way to tie together that story beat. And then we get to the final scene, which is just a non-stop rapid fire of brilliant laugh lines, including my favorite line of the episode, where SpongeBob asks,
You want me to explode?
and then he says,
Gary! You are gonna finish your dessert, and you are gonna like it!
and I just want to dig into the layers of this line. First off, it hammers home about how even now, SpongeBob has no idea what's going on, to the point where he doesn't even think of a literal explosion at the word explode. And also that SpongeBob's idea of yelling at someone is telling his pet to finish his dessert, which is the perfect balance of absurd and wholesome. Keep in mind, this is an 11-minute episode, and the reason that this 11-minute episode accomplishes so much with its limited runtime is that the lines and moments pack in so much with so little. This dessert line, the eyelash sweater, introducing Squidward to everyone in town wearing a salmon suit, and so many other moments in the episode just pack such a dense punch that no second in this episode is wasted. It's such a night and day difference from much lower quality episodes that this very same show would produce only a few years later. Like season 6's The Splinter, which struggled so hard to fill 11 minutes with story, to the point where I felt like it was just there to waste my time. Which, by the way, I also did a video where I rewrote The Splinter into a better episode, so if you're interested in that video, check it out right after this one. And then of course, to top off this perfect episode, Pie Bomb goes off right in Squidward's face with that classic SpongeBob nuclear explosion footage, and one last ouch from Squidward at the end, just so we know he survived. And that's dying for pie. There aren't a lot of pieces of media that I can look at and say, literally flawless, no criticism, but I cannot think of a single thing that I could change in this episode to tell a more effective story, other than to not have SpongeBob check off salmon suit twice on the list, but that's more of a continuity error, not a story error. It's truly one of the greatest cartoon episodes put to screen, and I hope that by examining Dying for Pie today, you either can one day write your own story that is just as effective, or have gained the tools to judge other stories using the standards I've laid out today. Let me know what you think of Dying for Pie and what your favorite joke of the episode is down in the comments below. If you like this video, liking and subscribing goes a long way. Never in my life have I ever seen a more misunderstood interpretation of a literary concept than how badly the modern SpongeBob writers missed the point of the imagination box. What is the imagination box? How is it used to tell a compelling story? And how did one episode absolutely ruin the concept? Chapter 1. Idiot Box. Idiot Box, as a story, is driven by one important object, which I will refer to as the imagination box. The box is introduced as nothing special. In fact, when the box first appears, you may not even think it would be the thing that dominates the plot of this episode, as the scene is much more focused on what is in the box, a big screen TV, which is promptly thrown in the trash, representing SpongeBob and Patrick's rejection of entertainment created by others in favor of their own imagination, which is represented by the box. The narrative then establishes the rules of the box. Rule number 1, it is ambiguous whether or not the box has any magical properties. Sure, Squidward hears noises coming from the box that are consistent with the magical adventures SpongeBob and Patrick claim to have, but the narrative gives the box enough plausible deniability that it could in fact just be an empty box. One possible explanation that Squidward himself ponders is that SpongeBob and Patrick just have a tape recorder and are messing with Squidward. Or, if you look a little deeper, perhaps what Squidward is hearing is the fun that SpongeBob and Patrick are having with their imaginations, which, since he himself is a rejecter of imagination, manifests and sounds like the real thing, which distresses and confuses him. Of the 3 possibilities, none are ever confirmed in the episode. By leaving the magical qualities of the box ambiguous, the narrative succeeds in communicating the lesson of the importance of imagination. The episode also focuses quite a lot on boxes, as shown with the scene where Squidward tries to watch TV and sees nothing but boxes. This focus on boxes is meant to reinforce Squidward's central character flaw. He is missing the point of imagination. He's wrapped up in the idea of seeing and hearing the literal things, the same way he would by watching TV. He's wrapped up in finding a button or a switch that makes the box turn on. He's wrapped up in the box itself, but it's not the box. It's the imagination. Squidward never overcomes this character flaw. In the final scene, he nearly gets it and almost accepts that it really was their imagination, but immediately falls right back into his doubts. A tragic anti-character arc indeed. It's in this moment that he starts to hear the box turning into a race car, which is actually a garbage truck taking the box to the dump, giving Squidward a final punishment for not overcoming his doubts. So you might be thinking right now about how much of a big nerd I am, which, fair. But you may be preparing to write a comment saying, "Who cares about all this? Idiot Box is a good episode because it's funny. Enough with all the philosophy." And what you may be failing to understand, person I just made up, is that the reason this episode is funny is because of all the nerd stuff I just went over. The ambiguity of the box, the deeper themes of imagination, the conflict between these 2 perspectives. These things drive every single joke in the episode. Except that one joke in the beginning where Patrick is like, "I need my glasses," and he pours out 2 literal glasses and has these big live action eyes. That was just a quick gag that establishes comedic tone. So I do hope that you'll have a deeper imagination in understanding what really made this episode as effective as a narrative as it was, as we talk about the sequel to Idiot Box. Chapter 2. Squidiot Box. Squidiot Box begins with SpongeBob finding the magic box in his attic. Actually, the box got thrown in the dump, so how would it be in SpongeBob's attic? CinemaSins, ding! No, seriously, in a vacuum, it doesn't really matter that SpongeBob finds the box in his attic. I mean, they probably could have just had him be at the dump at the beginning and finding it and it would have been fine, but I don't know. It's a way to kick off the plot, doesn't matter. So when SpongeBob gets in the box, he starts to realize that it isn't working. Now, this actually would have been a good setup for the episode. The box isn't working? Did SpongeBob lose his imagination? Oh, what sort of character journey will he go through to get it back? Unfortunately, that's not what happens. So the next scene shows SpongeBob taking the box to a magic box repair place. I guess I could get behind this, like, it's a bunch of other imaginative people and they all, try to repair their boxes, but, it would be ambiguous if they are literally repairing the magic or just having them symbolically realize it's their imagination, right? It'll all be symbolic. They're not gonna literally, confirm that the magic box was magic, right? They're not gonna do that. You ruined it. How could you do this to me, modern SpongeBob? I try to find the positives in your episodes, I really do, but did you really have the audacity to just confirm that the box from Idiot Box was just actually magic the whole time? That was what made the original episode work, right? What made the episode work was that it was ambiguous to whether or not it was their imagination. That Squidward was wrong about there being a special button or a switch that made the box do what it did. And what you just said was, actually, Squidward was right. It was just a magic box. There's no such thing as imagination. I don't think there is a more fitting representation of how far modern SpongeBob has fallen than that. So then they bring the broken box back and it doesn't work, not because of their own relationship to the concept of imagination, but because it has like faulty wiring or whatever. And then Squidward falls into it and jostles it back into place. And like, what does this represent? This is just things happening. Why was Squidward able to fix the imagination box? What is it about Squidward and his relationship to the concept of imagination that made him fix it? This is the problem when you take a symbolic object like the imagination box and just apply random rules to it that don't have any deeper meaning. And I don't want any of you, the curtains are blue, pro-media illiteracy people commenting, not everything has to have symbolic meaning, bro. Like, first of all, yes, everything in a story does have to have symbolic meaning, but also, even if you don't think that about Doodlebob or Nosferatu or the Flying Dutchman or any other supernatural SpongeBob concept I talked about on this channel, which I get why it takes a deeper understanding of literature to really get why those have deeper meanings. They do have deeper meanings, and you should accept my arguments why they do, but I understand why that's not immediately apparent to every person. But you really can't argue that the imagination box, the thing that SpongeBob puts his arm in the air and says, imagination, doesn't have any deeper symbolic meaning. So then Squidward in the box starts to imagine things and they appear. Not only is this a problem because you actually see what's happening inside of the box itself, again, getting rid of that ambiguity, but it also kind of betrays the pre-established rules of Idiot Box that imply that you have to actually believe in imagination in order to use the box. This episode did not demonstrate that Squidward now believes in imagination and thus would be able to use the box. He just does because we need to move the plot forward. So then there's a bunch of bits where Squidward tries to imagine good things and SpongeBob and Patrick keep obliviously saying bad things that appear in the box and, you know, yada yada. Squidward torture, the security system takes control of
Squidward's house.
You know what? This episode has bigger problems than that. So Squidward gets attacked by a bunch of dangerous things that have no symbolic meaning other than they are dangerous. The only stakes are, will Squidward die? Which is the weakest, most basic stakes you can have in a narrative. It doesn't engage with anything deeper that the protagonist has to lose that we can relate to. He's just running from stuff and getting hit by stuff and whatever. It's just a waste of time. There's this part where Squidward just says, this episode is so far gone at this point. Like, why does he hate imagination? Is it the concept of imagination? Like, the concept of imagination isn't doing this to him. Like, is it? Can imagination hurt you? Are you anti-imagination, modern SpongeBob writers? Don't answer that. Doodlebob then shows up, and Doodlebob is completely misused here. He's just another threat in a long list of boring threats that mean nothing more than it can hurt you. But I find it particularly insulting that it's Doodlebob, because one, Doodlebob can represent some really dense concepts. Check out my Doodlebob video if you want to know more. And two, Doodlebob and the Idiot Box actually could have crossed over in a way that would have been symbolically meaningful. Like, you know how earlier Squidward said he hated imagination? Maybe this episode's theme could have been how, like, being too imaginative can be dangerous. Like, if you were to isolate yourself from reality and go too far into imagination land, you can end up hurting others, and maybe that could have been represented using Doodlebob. I don't know. I usually like to look at these episodes and say, here's how they could have made it work, but I absolutely cannot get behind the idea of the imagination box being confirmed to be magic. If I were in control of the writing of this show and brought back this concept, I would make sure its magical properties stayed ambiguous. If I were to rewrite the episode, I would have it be about SpongeBob thinking the box was broken, only to have it get fixed when he goes through a character arc where he gets his imagination back. I'd pretty much cut all the details from the episode, and it would be functionally not the same. Anyway, the ending has Squidward go to the Krusty Krab, not realizing he's still stuck in the box. I'm trying to think if this ending has a broader message about how even with limitless imagination, we should still appreciate our own lives, but considering how the writers clearly didn't try with this one, I think it's just supposed to be misdirection without substance. Chapter 3. The Real Reason You Like Idiot Box. So, I'm assuming that you enjoy the episode Idiot Box, right? But why do you like it? It's not a trick question. I know your first answer would be, it's really funny. And that would be my first answer too. But why is this episode funny? A good joke is so much more than just the structure or delivery of said joke. The real, most important part of a joke is its context, and that is what Idiot Box accomplishes, setting up the proper context for its jokes to thrive. It achieves this because it's confident in its themes and uses the box to represent the concept of imagination. Now look, I can never truly know for sure what another person actually believes in their heart of hearts, but if someone told me that they would have enjoyed Idiot Box just as much without that context, without that symbolism, without that substance, I just don't believe you. The heart of why Idiot Box as an episode is as good as it is because the box itself is a clear, concise, and consistent representation of the concept of imagination. The reason why Squidiot Box is a bad episode is because the box in that episode is not clear, concise, or consistent. Now, the box and the things in it in Squidiot Box does still represent something. All supernatural elements of a story do, no matter how poorly they are written. I said a while back in my Doodle Bob video, the one that I'm sure you're gonna watch after this video, right? That Doodle Bob in its modern appearances didn't represent anything at all. And upon further reflection, what I really meant was the concept it did represent, which was thing that was dangerous, was a weak choice for a story because it didn't engage with anything deeper. But it did, in fact, represent something. The box in Squidiot Box, by the way, represents much of the same. Something dangerous that can hurt you. See, our imagination, while it is limitless in the literal things it can make up, you know, a thousand-headed lion. See, I just made that up. Something that our imagination can never come up with is a concept. Things like the concept of danger, or greed, or imagination. It'd be like coming up with a color that doesn't exist, or a sense you don't have. We don't come up with those things. We observe them in the world, and then when we imagine a thing like the aforementioned thousand-headed lion, it always represents a real concept. The thing isn't real, but the concept is. For example, a thousand-headed lion would represent great power, or perhaps great wisdom, depends on how you use it in a story, but it's literally impossible for you to use it in a story and have it represent nothing. You could write it poorly, but it can't represent nothing. It's conceptually impossible. Does it chase your main character? Well, now it represents power. Does it tell your character a secret? Guess what? Wisdom. Is it just a regular animal, part of the ecosystem? Well, now it represents the concept of nature itself. What really matters when writing a supernatural entity in a story is not whether or not it represents something at all, because it always will, but it is important that you, as the writer, understand what it could represent and make sure its representation isn't shallow. Something just being dangerous doesn't comment on anything deeper about behavior or society or the universe itself, and while it is certainly possible for you to write it that way, it's bad writing. And I think it is bad writing because it isn't a proper story and doesn't challenge people to be more thoughtful or empathetic, which leads to a less thoughtful and less empathetic population if more shallow stories take the place of deeper ones. I've seen a lot of my commenters attempt to argue against this claim, to say that sometimes a thing in a story can just be cool or be scary without any deeper meaning. And when I ask them for an example of a good story that does this, they usually mention a story that does in fact have an entity that represents something deeper. They just didn't understand that it did. I actually had a commenter recently try to say that a kaiju is an example of a monster that is just cool. You know, a kaiju. What Godzilla is. The city-destroying monster that famously represents the power of the atom bomb. Yep, no deeper themes there. And usually, because I like arguing, I'll go a little bit deeper with these commenters. Ask them, why do you want supernatural entities and stories to have no meaning? Why do you think it's better when they aren't? And this one particular kaiju misunderstanding commenter replied by saying that it was stuck up to think that I'm one of those people who says all art is political and that I preach media literacy, which I am. Yes, all art is political and media literacy is extremely important. Of course, this response doesn't actually argue that it's better for entities and stories to have little meaning, but it does communicate communicate to me something concerning. The idea that people are uncomfortable with engaging with deeper concepts. Now, I can't speak for this exact person, or anyone for that matter, but it seems that people are uncomfortable with shows having deeper themes or all art being political. And I think they feel that way because they just don't want to engage with these things, because these things are scary. It's scary to think that you might be Squidward in Idiot Box, lacking in imagination, thinking it's just a box. Well, in a literal sense, you're right. It is just a box. A story is just that. A story. An amalgamation of audio and visual cues meant to hold your attention so that you can watch an ad or whatever. But also, it's magic. Not the literal magic that Squidiot Box so foolishly confirmed to exist, but the symbolic magic of imagination, of expanding the way that you think, of attempting to understand the world around you and looking at things and being okay with them having more meaning, even if that meaning scares you. SpongeBob SquarePants is just about one of the most successful TV shows ever created. There is no one reason why SpongeBob is as successful as it is. More so a lot of little reasons. Something that SpongeBob does particularly well is its use of background characters. A background character is a character who is present in a scene but is not a part of the main cast, nor has a character arc of their own. There are a few different ways that SpongeBob can use its background characters, and they all tell us something about how background and minor characters are used in storytelling. As we go over how background characters are used in SpongeBob, try to consider some other stories that use background characters in similar ways, and whether or not they fail or succeed in using those characters. What makes SpongeBob's background characters so special is just how memorable they are. Most shows have intentionally forgettable background characters. Take, for example, Regular Show, where the background and minor characters are usually human, while the main characters are animals and gumball machines and whatever Muscle Man's supposed to be. The memorability of the background characters in SpongeBob is infinitely helped a lot by their colorful and shapely designs. You're much more likely to remember this than this. And this is nothing against Regular Show's background characters. I understand Regular Show's background characters are intentionally standard to allow the main characters to stick out more within the world. Another thing about the background fish that I love is that they have a little bit of edge to them. If they don't get their Krabby Patties, they get mad. So, without further ado, here are 3 ways SpongeBob SquarePants utilizes its background characters. Number 1. The Mob. The first episode of SpongeBob didn't include the background fish as we know them today. However, the conflict of the first episode revolves around a mob of anchovies. This origin story episode tells us how SpongeBob got his job at the Krusty Krab. Initially, Krabs didn't want to hire the little square dude due to Squidward's not so great recommendation.
No.
So he sends him off to pick up a product that doesn't exist just to get him out of his hair. Once SpongeBob is out of the picture, 4 buses surround the Krusty Krab and a mob of anchovies swarm the restaurant, demanding food. In this episode, and many others, the success, or sometimes even the survival, of our main characters come from whether or not they succeed or fail in satiating the mob's demands. In the first episode, satisfying the anchovies with their Krabby Patties is what allows our protagonist to prove himself and achieve his want: the job at the Krusty Krab. The anchovies are also used to give comeuppance to Squidward and Krabs. They are attacked by the anchovies, fearing for their lives, and we as the audience can get a little bit of satisfaction from that since they were so rude to SpongeBob earlier in the episode. Other episodes that use background fish as the mob include Patty Hype, where the mob's extreme love or extreme hate of the pretty patties motivates the characters' actions and the results of the story. The final conflict in As Seen on TV revolves around SpongeBob desiring approval from a group of disapproving background fish who just want their lunch while SpongeBob attempts to entertain them instead. His character desire or want contradicts the desires of the mob, and the mob is the one with the power. And Jellyfish Hunter uses the background fish's willingness to patronize the Krusty Krab more often if jellyfish jelly is on the menu as a motivator for Krabs to take advantage of the town's jellyfish, turning him into that episode's villain. I want to touch a little more on Jellyfish Hunter because it does something few shows would do. It actually gives a musical number to a background character. Usually a musical number is used in a story when a character's emotions are so strong that words alone can't properly convey the feeling. Since musical numbers so deeply tell us about a character's feelings, they are often delivered by characters whose feelings matter to the story. You know, not background characters. Fred the background fish's "Hey all you people" does convey strong emotion as it shows how Fred feels about the Krabby Patty with jellyfish jelly. However, since this is a background character, anything he does has to be in service of a main character, and this song is no exception. Fred's song is in service of Mr. Krabs' corruption arc, as Fred's passion for the jellyfish jelly, which influences the mob of other fish to have that same passion, is the source of Krabs' greed and his motivator for committing the evil he does in the episode. Instead of having a song that Krabs sings directly about how successful jellyfish jelly would be, we get the song from the perspective of a random customer. This is a more clever and much funnier way of conveying this information, all while not revealing Krabs' eventual intentions. It's important that this song be sung by a background character. If any main or even secondary character delivered this song, it would not accomplish what it sets out to do. Imagine for a second if Patrick sang this song. It certainly would have been possible. The voice actors have similar vocal ranges, Patrick is a Krusty Krab regular, and he loves food. Why is it that Patrick, a more recognizable character, wasn't given this song? It's because if Patrick sang the song, the episode would now have to, at least in part, be about Patrick. The song would not effectively inform Krabs' arc because the audience would be focused on Patrick. Giving the song to Fred, a background character, does not take this focus away from the story. He can sing and be done, and we can get back to what we're focused on. Patrick would also be a horrible choice for a representation of the mob. I mean, the dude lives under a rock. How much more off the grid can you get? If one of the many background fish we know pops up to sing a song, we as the audience can assume the other background fish feels similarly, as they often have a bit of a hive mind, especially when it comes to Krabby Patties. Now, before I go further into this discussion, I feel it important to address why I would think so deeply into this. At the end of the day, the "Hey all you people" song isn't as iconic because of how it serves the overall character arcs like I've been rambling about. It's iconic because it's hilarious for this random fish to start singing about a sandwich. This is the most surface level aspect to why this song works. It's just good. It's funny. It fits the tone of the show. It's sung well. However, something just being good or funny isn't what makes a show like SpongeBob as incredible as it is. Lots of things are funny, but very few things have such tight, well thought out storytelling. In this video's discussion, and most discussions on this channel, I want to consider the beneath-the-surface aspects that make stories like this successful, because it's these aspects that can be recognized and even replicated if learned to identify properly. Writing a good song, hiring a talented voice actor to sing it, hiring skilled animators to animate it, these things take skill of their own for sure, but those things don't matter if you don't truly know how to break down the fundamentals of storytelling to serve your own story. With all that in mind, let's explore the next use of the background fish. Number 2. As minor characters. Sometimes the background fish are used in a plot-significant way as characters who impact our leads individually. One episode where the background fish really steal the show is Chocolate with Nuts. In the episode, SpongeBob and Patrick become door-to-door chocolate bar salesmen. Their clients? The citizens of Bikini Bottom. These minor fish characters are responsible for some of the most memorable moments of this episode. Some of the characters that Sponge and Pat interact with in the episode have unique designs, such as the con man and the old lady's mother, who's this fried worm thing for some reason. But most of the characters in this episode are the same background fish we see around the Krusty Krab in any given episode, given life and voice during the brief amounts of screen time they have. Watching this episode as a fan of the other episodes makes you feel more of a connection to Bikini Bottom as a setting. These people don't feel like props to be brought on and set aside when not needed for the plot. They feel like human beings, citizens of the world we are immersed in. I think it's a big strength of the episode that one of its most memorable characters, the guy who screams, "Chocolate!" is a background fish that we see all the time. You can see him in other episodes and be like, hey, that's the chocolate guy. He's at the Krusty Krab. Oh, I know that guy. I think that's why the pizza delivery customer from Pizza Delivery is a background fish that we never see again. This guy is so made to be hated that they had to retire his character model like a sports number so he would never be seen again.
Since the chocolate guy is so likable.
Not only because of his hilarious outburst, but also being the one who saves the day at the end by buying all the chocolate, the animators deciding to use a familiar face only enhances this episode. And now the last use of the background fish as collateral damage. Number 3. As potential victims of violence. You'd be surprised how many life and death situations pop up in SpongeBob. Between Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy's villains, quote-unquote evil butterflies, and even a comically large deep fryer, the citizens of Bikini Bottom are often in constant peril. Seriously, what's up with the joke with the deep fryer and the fish sticks? It's so morbid! The protection of innocent civilians is a common trope of storytelling. Seen mostly in superhero and science fiction stories, the trope involves a group of random bystanders caught up in the wrong place at the wrong time, causing tension and adding stakes to our hero's journey. There is one incredibly important aspect of this trope often not noticed. In a story, there actually has to be a reason for the audience to care if something happens to these civilians. A story should never expect its audience to care about random civilians just by virtue of them being random civilians. There are ways to make the audience care about random civilians, and it can be done with only a few seconds of screen time. Let's take a look at the Alaskan Bullworm episode. After the initial attack from the worm, the citizens of Bikini Bottom all gather in the Krusty Krab to figure out what to do. With just a few brief moments, we get a glimpse of some of the average citizens who've had a run-in with the worm, like this guy. Now, yes, this is a funny gag, but it also tells us that someone in this world was hurt by this. And since this character made us laugh and he's kind of funny looking, we now care about his well-being. In this scene, we see more about exactly how this antagonistic force hurt these people, and how they propose to work it out. After Sandy volunteers to go after the worm, Krabs proposes they also try Patrick's backup plan. Take Bikini Bottom and push it somewhere else. To which we cut away to the citizens of Bikini Bottom banding together to literally push the city somewhere else. Classic. This joke is then called back to in the end, where even though they succeeded in pushing the entire town away, they end up getting crushed by the worm anyway, punishing them for listening to Patrick's foolish idea, and reinforcing the main lesson of the episode being that you can't run away from your problems. The worm then lets out a jovial "ouch" that sounds quite non-threatening to let the audience know that, even though they may not be having the best day, the citizens of Bikini Bottom are going to be fine. This was necessary to the story because we've been made to care about the citizens of Bikini Bottom, and while we didn't get to see them succeed at saving their city, well, we know they aren't all dead either. Another one of my favorite instances of the background fish being potential collateral damage is in SpongeGuard on Duty. The main theme of this episode is that with great power comes great responsibility. SpongeBob is shown to want all the glory that Larry gets for being a lifeguard, so he lies about being one himself without fully understanding what he would need to do. The central conflict of this episode is that the lives of the beachgoers are in the hands of professional goofy goober SpongeBob. What you may not have noticed about this episode is that it gets you to care about these beachgoers in a simple yet effective fashion. It happens in this moment.
These good people.
Go, go, go!
This might seem like a simple throwaway gag. Larry calls the beachgoers good people, and then we cut to a hot dog eating contest, something often associated with lowbrow individuals. What is behind the surface of this line, though, is the seed being planted that these lives are valuable, worth protecting. They live in peace, they participate in goofy activities, they're happy. Also, hot dogs are funny. Similar to what I said about the butt guy earlier, we as the audience are more inclined to like characters who make us laugh. But even with all of this work making the
background fish matter, they still have them all leave towards the end of the episode, in favor of putting Patrick in danger instead. So instead of SpongeBob being responsible for the lives of all the background fish, he's just responsible for Patrick alone. So even though the episode did great work making you care about the background fish, there truly was no substitute for how much the audience would care about an established main character instead. But why get so wrapped up on background fish? Well, personally, I feel a bit of a camaraderie with these background fish because, for me, working as a relatively new actor in Hollywood, I've worked a lot of background roles myself. Here's me in an indie movie.
There I am, Gary, there I am!
Here's me in last year's New Year's Eve show.
Look, Gary, there I am again!
What I find fascinating about background characters is the limits to which the story makes them matter. There's no limit to how much a story wants you to care about their main characters, but give too much attention to someone smaller, and you could distract from who the story is really about. But if you don't acknowledge the background enough, you risk having your main characters exist in a bubble outside of the broader society in which they interact. Background characters not only represent people, they also represent place. These background fish aren't just fish, they're the citizens of Bikini Bottom, and the setting in which they inhabit is represented through them. And I think that their presentation is so well done for the reasons I stated earlier, and many others, that they've truly made us feel a connection to a fictional town in the ocean full of talking fish.
In a cartoon, should the story be optional? Should we, as an audience, find it acceptable for there to be a narrative where little more occurs than a few gags and sequences of events? If you're the writers of the SpongeBob episode Laundro Madness, the answer is a resounding yes. And I have to say, I disagree. Chapter 1. Laundro Madness. The plot of Laundro Madness, not story, plot, is that Squidward gets ink on his shirt, so he has to take it to the laundromat where hijinks ensue. Kind of a tangent, but I think it's so crazy that they actually revisit The Wash, considering that location debuted in Midlife Crustacean, a banned episode, which I did a video on, by the way, link in the description. Kind of funny that the team is aware that even though this episode is banned, most older viewers of the show would still remember it and find the reference meaningful. Anyway, while at the laundromat, there are a bunch of gags that revolve around Bikini Bottom residents. Sandy using her suit as a laundry machine, Larry arm wrestling a cloud of bad smells, the Nosferatu assistant guy shrinking his skin because it was actually dry clean only, etc, etc, etc. Look, all these moments got at least a small chuckle out of me, but I want to pose a question. If we removed all of these little bits and only focused on the parts of the episode where Squidward was dealing with his stain, what would change? If you look at the episode from purely a plot perspective, nothing would change. Now, if you look at it from an entertainment perspective, then these moments succeed, right? They're entertaining. I'm entertained looking at the bits. Who cares? It gave me a little ha ha ha, so it's fine. If this is your perspective, I do want to pose a question. In other episodes, where each and every bit is contingent to the main plot, such as, say, an episode like the Fry Cook games, where everything that happens is related to the plot of SpongeBob and Patrick competing in the games themselves. Don't the bits in that episode land just a little better, and as such, are more entertaining than these more disconnected bits in Laundro Madness? This is why I think the Fry Cook game succeeds more as a bit-heavy episode. The early bits establish the gravitas of the events, then the story is set with SpongeBob and Patrick's rivalry, then we get more Fry Cook games related bits that are not only funny on their own, but compound on the already established story and help lead us into the climax of the episode. Look me in the face and say that that kind of episode structure works just as well as let's have some disconnected jokes. But how could Laundro Madness have connected these bits to its story? Well, first off, it would need to have a story in the first place, because from what I can see, Laundro Madness completely lacks a story at all. Chapter 2. Defining story. So, what do I mean when I say that Laundro Madness has no story? Well, in order to understand what I mean, we are going to have to define what a story is and why I don't think this episode meets my definition. So, if you define story literally as a recounting of events, then yeah, sure, this episode has a story. But I believe that it is important to hold things like TV show episodes and movies to a higher standard. When I say the word story in regards to such a creative work, what I am talking about is how how the creative work conveys deeper themes and perspective to the audience beyond the surface level recounting of events. So when you hear me use the word story in this video and all of my others, that is what I am talking about. So with all that in mind, what is the theme of Laundro Madness? Nothing. What perspectives are challenged or reaffirmed throughout the episode's runtime? None whatsoever. What sort of life lessons does the episode teach? Nada. Squidward has a stain, he gets it off. That's it. There's this evil laundry machine that wreaks havoc and it gets destroyed. Hooray. But that's it. It's just things happening. Sure, the episode has a lot of things that you would see in a typical cartoon story. A character, Squidward, has a problem and encounters issues in trying to fix that problem. But Squidward's stain on his shirt lacks the emotional weight needed to properly hold my attention as an audience member. Why should I care about this stain? Did you care when you watched the episode? No, seriously, be honest with me. Is this really enough for you? Guy gets a stain on his shirt? Really? If you were in the same situation as Squidward, why would this matter to you? Well, it only would matter to you if there was something deeper that the stain would get in the way of. Just needing to clean the shirt is not enough. That's not a story. A stain on your shirt would matter if you, say, needed it for a job interview because it would be representative of your current financial and social situation. Sure, the recounting of events is the same as it would be in Laundro Madness, have problem, fix problem, but if the shirt was needed for a job interview, now you have a story. Now the stain represents a barrier to you getting what you want. Compare this stain plot to another episode of the show where a character has something wrong with them that they need to fix. Something smells. In the episode, people keep avoiding SpongeBob. We as the audience know that it's because his breath stinks, but he doesn't, so he assumes that it's because he's ugly. Like Laundro Madness, Something Smells has a character afflicted with something negative that they have to deal with throughout the episode, but because SpongeBob's affliction is directly tied to an insecurity, we, as the audience, have a much more emotional response to this affliction and are more invested in seeing the protagonist overcome it. Squidward's stain, on the other hand, is not tied to anything deeper about him. It's just a stain, a minor inconvenience, and good stories actually aren't about minor inconveniences. They never were, and they never will be. A minor inconvenience can only go so far as the major conflict that the minor inconvenience represents. There's another element of Laundro Madness's plot that I need to talk about: the laundry machine robot. So Plankton puts a bunch of his evil scientist stuff in a washing machine, and it turns into an evil robot that attacks everyone. This adds a little more stakes to the episode, but it completely falls flat because, like Squidward's stain, the robot represents nothing more than dangerous thing that will hurt you. Compare the threat of the robot washing machine in this episode to the threat of the Alaskan bullworm in Sandy, SpongeBob, and the Worm. So the Alaskan bullworm is also a dangerous thing that will hurt you, but the story of the episode is not actually about dealing with it. The story is really about Sandy being too overly confident in believing that she can save the town on her own, which puts her life in danger. The threat is not the Alaskan bullworm. The threat is Sandy's own ego. Fighting the Alaskan bullworm is the recounting of events. Sandy's character arc is the story. In contrast, the evil laundry machine in Laundro Madness isn't used for anything deeper than the recounting of events. There's a dangerous thing gets neutralized, no one learns anything, it's not a story. I think what was maybe the most insulting part of this episode was where this guy looks to the camera and says,
"I think we all learned a lesson here today."
What lesson? Is this supposed to be a joke about how the episode lacked a lesson? That doesn't make up for it, you know. There's a similar kind of joke present at the end of The Sponge Who Could Fly, where SpongeBob says this:
You taught me a valuable lesson, although I'm not quite sure what it was.
But this line works because that episode actually did have a lesson. It was just delivered in a silly way, and this line points that out, but it still works as a joke because the episode had an actual story. I believe that this is bad writing. I think that there should not be episodes of television shows or movies that lack these things, and I believe that not because it's less entertaining when they lack these things, though it certainly is. I believe in this principle strongly because TV show episodes and movies should serve a larger purpose to broader culture and society beyond simply being entertaining. If you think about it, there is no difference between watching an episode like Laundro Madness and watching, say, those TikTok videos where someone cuts soap. Seriously, no difference beyond the superficial. Maybe Laundro Madness might make you laugh and you get to look at familiar SpongeBob characters, but at the end of the day, something like Laundro Madness is no better than videos of bottles breaking or Subway Surfer footage. It's just a way to kill time. But some of the other episodes I've talked about in comparison, while they also take up 11 minutes of your time with quirky visuals and funny jokes, there's something deeper in all of these episodes that I think is beneficial on both a personal and social level. The Fry Cook Games challenges us to think about the nature of competition and how it can affect friendship. Something Smells challenges us to think about how we're perceived by others based on superficial externalities and how we can emotionally deal with that. Sandy, SpongeBob and the Worm challenges us to think about when is the right time to stand up and be the hero in our own lives. Even The Sponge Who Could Fly, a much less popular episode, challenges us to think about our own big dreams and how they might be difficult to manage if achieved. Keep in mind, these are episodes that are meant for children. I viewed all of these episodes when I was younger than 5 years old, and whether or not I deeply understood these themes then, or if I didn't really understand them until I was older, doesn't really matter. What matters is that these themes are present in these episodes that have been viewed by millions. What matters is that there is social value in thinking about the lessons they impart. Now, if you look at all the movies and TV show episodes ever made, a vast majority of them fall into the camp of actually having a meaningful story where things like Laundro Madness are much more scarce. The reason they can even get away with something like Laundro Madness is that SpongeBob earned the respect of its audience by telling actual stories, by the way, and is such a cultural zeitgeist that people will watch the show based on name recognition alone. Think an indie show could get away with this? Not a chance. And I find it quite disappointing not only that the SpongeBob writers would betray this trust that is built up by its audience from those deeper stories it told in its past, but that it would contribute to the normalization of creative works like this lacking stories. But I've been doing a lot of classic SpongeBob good, modern SpongeBob bad, and I do want to acknowledge that plenty of modern SpongeBob episodes still have stories. Great stories, but while a good story is not guaranteed in modern SpongeBob, every classic SpongeBob episode has a story. Or does it? Chapter 3, The Krusty Krab Training Video. The Krusty Krab Training Video is an episode that revolves around a training video for the Krusty Krab. Despite it being one of my favorite episodes of the series, it has no story. Except it totally does. I lied. The Krusty Krab training video does contain what I would consider to be a story, but I bet a lot of you believed me just now when I said it didn't have a story. And if you didn't believe me, if you knew that this episode had a story, well, good noodle star for you seeing through my ruse. The story of the Krusty Krab training video is that of SpongeBob, portrayed in the episode as a new employee, wanting to learn the Krabby Patty secret formula, and at the end of the episode, after going through the training, achieving that goal. What is the theme? Discipline. What perspectives are challenged? Being undisciplined, as shown through Squidward. What perspectives are reaffirmed? SpongeBob's sense of discipline. What is the lesson of the episode? Be confident and determined like SpongeBob, and you will succeed. And beyond all of this, the satirical nature of the corporatized training video adds a layer of nuance to this story by criticizing the corporate culture in which the story takes place.
Mr. Krabs, can I have a raise?
No.
But you might be thinking, sure, Krusty Krab training video has this story, but it's mostly just a bunch of bits, right? In that way, it's not too different from Laundro Madness.
You're right? Wrong.
While not every bit in Krusty Krab training video is directly tied to SpongeBob learning how to make a Krabby Patty, they do contribute to the overall story by thematically setting the stage of the story. Take, for example, these early moments in the episode that mythologize the creation of the Krusty Krab. While on the surface, this looks like nothing more than a series of gags relating to Mr. Krabs being cheap, the entire sequence serves to elevate the Krusty Krab as a place that is special, and thus making us as the audience want to see SpongeBob learn to make that Krabby Patty. It contributes to the way we feel at the end of the episode. So, while we as the audience may not even be aware that the Krusty Krab training video has a story, if you believed me at the beginning of this section when I said it didn't, well, it doesn't actually matter if the audience recognizes the story. What matters is that the story is there. Krusty Krab training video definitely has a smaller emphasis on story as opposed to just about every other classic SpongeBob episode. But because the writers of this episodes are such masters of storytelling, they were able to subvert the story and create something beautiful within the confines of a satirical training video. That taught us a lesson about being disciplined, made fun of corporate business practices, and gave us a boatload of laughs all along the way. This brings me back to Laundro Madness. Really, let's look at these episodes side by side. Among the vast majority of the population, which episode do you think is actually going to remain in people's minds? If you think for a moment that there's not a meaningful comparison, that both episodes have the same level of validity, you must be intentionally sticking your head in the sand. Chapter 4. Why defend bad art? So I've been making these videos for a little while now, and I really do love engaging with my comments section. I really do appreciate a lot of the positive feedback that I get on just about every video I do. But something that stands out to me are some of the dissenters. Look, I know it's a part of being a YouTuber that you're gonna get people who disagree with you, but I do find it outright baffling how much some individuals want to defend bad art. So to those of you out there that think it can be optional for an episode of a TV show or a movie to lack a story, that think it's okay that episodes like Laundro Madness exist, why do you think that? Keep in mind that if Laundro Madness or anything else like it had a story, all of the elements that you may have liked about it, the characters, the comedy, the action, would all still be present. I'm not advocating for removing anything from these episodes. I'm advocating for deeper themes and a meaningful story to be present alongside these other fun elements. So when you comment something like, because it's fun, or, oh, it's fun, oh, it's just a show for kids, keep in mind, I'm not getting rid of any of that. I just want it to be better. With that in mind, what do you feel like you would lose if story was present? See, it is my worldview that every movie or episode of a TV show that we watch should be expected to have a story. And if a movie or TV show lacks a story, it should be criticized to the point where the writers behind these movies and TV shows will be incentivized to always include a story. I believe that this is important and necessary because a higher abundance of stories with deeper themes and lessons lead to a more thoughtful population, which leads us to being better equipped to deal with social problems. And the fact that many stories do not include deeper themes and lessons, while that is certainly not the only root cause of all of our problems, it is a contributor to a more shallow and apathetic populace. So that's my worldview, that deeper stories are a social positive and that TV show and movie writers making sure their works have deeper stories doesn't negatively impact their entertainment value. We get something out of it and we lose nothing. I don't really see how anyone could disagree with that, but if you do, please leave your well thought out and respectful counter argument in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching this video to the end. If you want to support the channel, I've got a Patreon as well as channel memberships. Also, check out my gaming channel. I've done some videos about the SpongeBob video games over there, like this one about the SpongeBob movie GBA game and how it compares to the film. You should really check it